Okay, hi everybody. It's Shaz. It is Wednesday, February 26th. And hello to all of you. Hope you're all doing well. I actually have a bit of a special guest, I would say, on the line right now. I'm not going to reveal his real name, but he is somebody who is in logistics, specifically his job entitles logistics, freighting, things like that. I'm going to use the name of Bob for the purpose of this phone call. So, Bob, are you there?
I am.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Kind of talked to you a little bit earlier, and really the purpose of the call is just to give regular, everyday folks who have some concerns out there about the coronavirus and how it might impact day-to-day life. So I was hoping that you might be able to give us some insight, maybe your opinion on logistics and how they might be affected. So we definitely appreciate you taking the time. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself as far as what your experience is in logistics?
I've been in transportation for over 35 years, mostly in domestic transportation, but our company does domestic and international and pretty much all modes of transportation. And it's kind of a field, it seems like once you get into it, you kind of stick with it.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware of the kind of the current situation going on across the globe with coronavirus. I'm curious, have you taken any of the CDC's recommended, I don't want to say they're recommended preparation actions, but they did come out saying that Americans should prepare for possible disruptions in supply chains. Have you taken any steps on your own?
I have personally today, yes. I went out and with my wife, and we went out and purchased some perishables and things that could last on the shelf for a while. And because everything is pretty much unknown, we don't know if this is actually going to happen or not. Although they did say that the possibilities of having a pandemic is not a matter of where, but when. It's coming, is what they're saying. But can we erase that?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Would you be able to maybe explain the basic steps of how I might use the wrong words, but how logistics work as far as how freight, and I'm going to use, like, let's say specifically internationally, and maybe it applies domestically, how freight gets from one place to another?
Sure. Most freight, actually, I can't think of very many exceptions. Most freight will start out with some ground transportation, no matter where it's at in the world, whether it's in the United States or in another country, and it has to get to either an airport or an ocean port. And so usually ground transportation will do that, and then the freight is usually taken to a warehouse or a facility where it's put into a container. If it's going to be on an ocean, it could be consolidated, or it could be a full container load to go on an ocean liner, or it could be a smaller shipping going to an airport that'll be consolidated with other people's shipments and prepared and shipped on an airplane. And that will arrive in the United States at an airport, or if it's an ocean container, it'll arrive at a port in the United States where everything will be disembarked and it ends up on a truck again to go to the not to the final destination necessarily, but to a warehouse where it'll break it down and it'll be distributed to people, the end users. And it's kind of oversimplistic, but basically it starts out with a truck and almost always ends up with a truck.
You know what? That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that specifically in the United States that we have the necessary infrastructure or manpower to, let's say, to continue the supply chain if I don't want to say a large amount of the population is sick, but let's say even if a small fraction of drivers, whether it's pilots or semi drivers, boat captains, anything like that. Do you think that we're prepared to be able to have, I'm going to say, supply chain hiccups? Do you think we have in place the necessary infrastructure?
Well, actually, during normal times, in the last couple of years, drivers have been in short supply. So and so has equipment. So equipment's been very tight, and the prices are high. And so anything that would impact that to make less drivers available would certainly impact the results. There would be less trucks moving because you wouldn't have operators to run them up and down the road if there's a lot of people that are sick, or if there is, if there ends up being quarantine areas that you have to avoid, or things can get trapped in places like that.
Okay. Is there any situation that you've thought of, being in logistics and being aware of the coronavirus? Has there been any scenario you've played out in your own head, like what it would look like for the average American? Let me rephrase that. I'm probably not saying it right. Is there a particular situation that you fear would impact, an average person, where we would start to see things not being on the shelf? Could you maybe explain what that might look like?
Well, one of the most critical things that I really hadn't thought about until I heard it on the news yesterday was that a lot of our medication and pharmaceuticals come from Asia, and they could start becoming in short supply and difficult to get a hold. And some of the drugs, people's lives depend on them. So that's definitely kind of worrisome.
Yeah, absolutely. How long do you think it would take for us to begin to see supply chain disruptions?
Well, I think they're already here to a degree. I don't know about pharmaceuticals, but as far as like parts, a lot of manufacturing in the United States depends on parts coming from Asia, and the supply chain has been definitely impacted. There's some people starting to have problems getting the parts that they've had long-standing orders with manufacturers in China, and they're starting to look for other sources to try to keep their factories open.
Are there any other goods that you could see? So, like, we've got the pharmaceuticals and, auto manufacture parts. Are there other goods that are even produced domestically that you could see us having an impact, even if it was food or paper supplies? Is there anything like that you could foresee being disrupted with the coronavirus?
Well, it's amazing the amount of stuff that we do import from China, and I never dreamed that a lot of our pharmaceuticals come from there. But there's a lot of things that are like that, even in the food chain. There's stuff coming from there too.
Sure. I'm curious. I know the Chinese New Year in my business, we get. We always know that during the Chinese New Year we're going to have some delays in getting certain products in. Do you think right now, coming off of the Chinese New Year and now going into this current time where people have been quarantined and factories have been shut down, do you think right now we're going to see the start of disruptions? And if so, do you think it has anything to do with the Chinese New Year, or do you think any disruptions that we see in the short term are going to specifically be because of the factories being shut down because of the coronavirus?
I think the virus just exacerbated what normally happens every year with the Chinese New Year, and they're trying to get the factories online, but a lot of people aren't coming back to work right away. People left the big cities. I don't know where they went, but they said that there's one area where like as many as 5 million people left.
Wow. Yeah.
This one big town and big city, and they're trying to get them back to get the factories back online, but it's a slow process.
Sure. Could you see a scenario where actual logistic companies would, let's say, refuse to do business, whether it's, I would assume it would be with another country, Or maybe it could even be domestically. Could you see a situation where a company like yours would say, you know what, we don't want to put our drivers in harm's way, or we don't want them exposed to potentially contaminated material, so we are not going to do business with X, whoever that may be, for the next X amount of days? Is that something that you've heard discussed, or is that something you could even envision happening, where, and just to be specific, where it's not the U.S. government mandating that we can't do business with certain places, but actually a privately owned company?
I can't, because the way things are regulated, most companies like us are profit driven, and you're going to find a way to run the business, but usually the drivers don't come in contact with the freight that much. And most of the supply chain, the freight is in a sealed container, or in an ocean container, or in a sealed air container. Okay. And they're not really coming in contact with any freight. But I would think that there's a lot of regulations around that, what can be put in those things too.
Okay, and so just to make it clear, you would not see a situation where an actual company being profit driven would make the call to not do business. It would more than likely come from the federal government if that were to ever happen.
It would have to be Customs and Border Control that would prohibit something.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're kind of compelled to do it. Otherwise.
Okay. Do you see any potential for fuel shortages? Is that anything that's been discussed?
No. And actually, from what I see on the financial channels, they're talking about the price of crude dropping and cutting back production to try to stabilize the price at a higher level. So there seems to be a glut of fuel around right now.
Okay. So that is not, let's say, top level concern that there could be fuel shortages. So all in all, and again, I really appreciate your time and your insight. All in all, would you say maybe on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being where we were 6 months ago, where it wasn't even a thought, 10 being entire cities are quarantined and freight comes to a complete standstill? Where would you think we are right now in the process?
Maybe a 2.
Okay. So very, very beginnings of. Okay. Well, no, that's good. That's good to know.
When I say a 2, you're kind of breaking up on me. But when I say a 2, that means that there might be some impacts happening right now, but there's a lot of preparation work going into it. A lot of thought being surrounding what if scenarios.
Okay. So would you say the freight companies are actively coming up with game plans for how to handle the coronavirus? Is that something you think that's being discussed?
I think we've discussed a lot of things like that. Even like our operations people, working remotely from home. In our business, we can do that because of the software that we all use. So a lot of stuff can be done from home.
Okay.
And as far as managing the whole process.
So it sounds like, and I'm not an expert, but it sounds like if we were to have supply chain disruptions, more than likely it's going to either come from the originating country where they can't send the supplies, or maybe in a worst case scenario it would come from drivers, where it would come from there not being enough drivers to freight supplies from place to place. Would that be correct?
Right now, domestically, I think we're pretty solid still. Where I see the biggest problem coming, personally, from my personal opinion, is that it's going to be a glut of freight coming out of China, out of Asia, and our West Coast ports aren't going to be able to handle it all, and there's going to be ships that are be stacked up in the port waiting for their turn to come in and unload. So it'll be just like a huge traffic jam,
like a bottleneck.
And, it'll take a while to work it out, but the flow will start eventually. Inevitably, it's going to happen.
Okay.
But there's going to be inconveniences for everybody.
Well, you know what? That sounds, at least from my perspective, it seems hopeful. Where, as the CDC said, we should at least prepare for disruptions. But it doesn't sound like apocalyptic by any means. Would you kind of agree with that?
No, because I mean, if you look at they're saying the death rates are nothing near what they expected. And it's not that this isn't bad. I don't want to minimize that.
Sure.
But so far, it's been controlled pretty well in Asia, better in Asia than it has been in Italy and some of the other, in Iran especially. They're saying it's kind of out of control there. But
absolutely, absolutely, good points for sure. Well, you know what? I mean, it's been really awesome to have you on this phone call to give some insight, because, like I said, people are wondering, and people are looking for, not comfort, that's not the right word, but they're looking for real information from real people that have experience with this.
That way you can make real time good decisions.
Absolutely.
If you got information, you can make better decisions. And people have to remember too, this is changing by the minute. So what seems to be real bad right now may turn out to be not quite as bad. Awesome. So we always want to plan for the worst, but hopefully hope for the best.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And to everybody out there, I hope this was meaningful in some way, and that you should continue to prep however you see fit. But that is coming from somebody who has lots of experience with logistics, and definitely appreciate your time. So, Shaz out.